The fluorescent in Bay 4 of the district office has been flickering since March. Nobody filed a work order. I know because I checked. I checked because of something the flicker does at a specific interval, 3 short, 1 long, that matches the gap pattern in the radio log from the Thibodeau crossing on the night Marcus Fontenot stopped answering his channel. That was 14 months ago. Facility says the bulb is on backorder. The radio log says the channel was clear. Both of those things cannot be true in the way they are being presented as true, and I have been a bridge inspector for 11 years, which means I am professionally trained to find the place where a thing presents as sound and is not. I should explain how this started. My name is Daniel Corsell. I hold a Level 2 certification through AASHTO, which means I am qualified to perform routine, in-depth, and fracture-critical member inspections on any bridge structure in the state of Louisiana. I have been employed by the Louisiana Department of Transportation and Development, DOTD, since I was 26 years old, first as a field technician under a senior inspector named Harold Arsenault, then as lead inspector on the Lafourche Parish Corridor, then, for the past 4 years, as a roving senior inspector covering an 11-parish territory that includes some of the most structurally complex movable bridge infrastructure in the country. Louisiana has more movable bridges per capita than any other state. Bascule bridges, swing bridges, vertical lift bridges, structures that open and close for marine traffic, that are mechanically active, that have operating schedules coordinated with the Coast Guard and the Army Corps of Engineers. They are not passive infrastructure. They breathe. They move on schedules. They have operational windows and maintenance cycles and control houses where operators sit through the night watching indicator panels and talking to towboat captains on marine band radio. I tell you this because the nature of the work matters. A bridge inspector in a place like this is not simply measuring corrosion and documenting crack propagation in concrete decking. You are working on structures that are simultaneously infrastructure and machine, simultaneously fixed and mobile, simultaneously public road and managed waterway. The inspection protocols for movable bridges are substantially more involved than those for fixed spans. You are documenting mechanical systems, gear assemblies, counterweight mechanisms, trunnion bearings, bascule locks, electrical drive systems, in addition to structural components. An in-depth inspection on a major movable bridge can take a full crew 3 days. I have done hundreds of them. I am telling you all of this because I need you to understand that when I say something was wrong, I am not speaking as a layman who misread a situation. I am speaking as someone whose entire professional existence is built around the systematic detection of discrepancy between how a structure presents and what it actually is. What I found was not a structural discrepancy. It was something else. And the protocol that governs it, the one I eventually found, the one that should not exist in any operational manual I was ever issued, was written by someone who found it before me and did not know what else to do with it. The Lafourche corridor runs roughly from Thibodeau south toward the coast, following Bayou Lafourche through a series of swing and bascule bridges that serve both highway traffic and the working waterway. It is not glamorous territory. Most of the bridges on the corridor are aging structures, several are on the department's high-priority replacement list, which in Louisiana means they have been waiting for federal funding for between 8 and 22 years. The working environment is humid, corrosive, and relentless. Salt air comes up from the Gulf and eats steel at a pace that makes maintenance a permanent emergency rather than a scheduled activity. I had worked the corridor for 3 years before I took the roving senior position. I knew the bridges on it the way you know roads you drive every day, not with conscious attention but with a body-level familiarity, a sense of when something has shifted that you cannot always articulate before you can articulate it. The Thibodeau Crossing, officially designated LA 308 Structure 11-01, is a double-leaf bascule bridge over Bayou Lafourche, built in 1961 and last rehabilitated in 2004. It has a control house on the east bank, a center pivot mechanism I had pulled apart and documented 4 times, and a particular resonance in the deck grating at highway speed that I have never heard on any other bridge. I was not assigned to that bridge the night Marcus Fontenot disappeared. I was assigned to Structure 09-17, a swing bridge 12 miles north, performing what we call a hands-on inspection of the pivot pier after a towboat reported unusual vibration during a recent opening. I had been on site since roughly 8 in the evening. It was October. The weather was clear and cool by Louisiana standards, which means it was about 64 degrees and the humidity was still enough that you could feel it on the back of your hands. Marcus was the bridge operator on 11-01 that night. He was not DOTD. Bridge operators in Louisiana fall under a separate maintenance and operations division, and the relationship between inspectors and operators is collegial but distinct. We share channel assignments on the district radio system and we coordinate on inspection windows, but we are not the same workforce and we do not answer to the same supervisors. I had met Marcus 3 or 4 times. He was a big man, quiet, competent in the way that people who have done a specific job for a long time become competent, not showy about it, just present. He had been on 11-01 for 6 years. At 11:47 p.m., I heard him on the radio confirming a marine traffic clearance. Routine call. Towboat Yvette Marie requesting a bridge opening, southbound. Marcus confirmed, gave the standard clearance language, and that was the last transmission anyone logged from him that night. By 1:15 a.m., the relief operator could not reach him by radio or by phone. By 2 a.m., DOTD maintenance had a crew at the bridge. The control house was locked from the inside. The bridge was in the closed, locked position. The indicator panel showed all systems normal. Marcus's coffee thermos was on the console. His jacket was on the hook by the door. Marcus was not there. I did not learn any of this until the following morning. I finished my inspection at the pivot pier around midnight, filed my preliminary field notes, drove back to the district office in Thibodaux, and went home. The news about Marcus reached me through the district safety officer at about 6:30 a.m. in a call I took in my kitchen. There was an investigation. Sheriff's Office, DOTD Safety, and eventually the Coast Guard because the bridge sits over a navigable waterway. I was interviewed because I had been in the corridor that night, because I had heard his last radio transmission, because my field notes put me within 12 miles of 11-01 at the time of his disappearance. I told them what I knew, which was nothing useful. The investigation went on for about 6 weeks before it was functionally suspended. No evidence of foul play. No body recovered from the bayou or anywhere else. No indication of what had happened between Marcus's 11:47 p.m. transmission and the 1:15 a.m. welfare check. The case remained open in the sheriff's system as a missing persons matter, but the active investigation ended. DOTD conducted its own internal review, which produced a 14-page report I was eventually able to read through the district safety office. The report's conclusions were, in the language of institutional documentation, inconclusive. It noted that the control house door had been locked from the inside using the interior deadbolt, a detail that was described as anomalous but was not explained. It noted that all bridge systems had remained in normal operational status throughout the incident period. It noted that there was no recorded radio traffic from 11-01 between 11:47 p.m. and 1:15 a.m., and that this gap was consistent with a quiet night on the waterway and did not in itself indicate anything unusual. The report did not address one thing. In the district radio log, the automated system that timestamps and archives all channel traffic. There were 3 entries between 11:47 p.m. and 1:15 a.m. attributed to Marcus's assigned unit, a handheld Motorola APX 6000 that was standard issue for operators on the corridor. The entries were not voice transmissions. They were keying events, the push-to-talk button being pressed without any voice following. Carrier signal only. Each one lasting between 4 and 8 seconds. The first was at 12:09 a.m. The second was at 12:34 a.m. The third was at 12:58 a.m. The radio was found on the console of the control house, next to the thermos. It was fully charged. It showed no record of those transmissions in its own internal log. The district radio system and the handheld unit were logging different realities. The report described this as a potential equipment calibration issue and recommended the radio system be reviewed by the vendor. I found no record of that review ever occurring. I did not become fixated on Marcus's disappearance immediately. That sounds cold, and I want to be honest about it. I was affected by it. You don't hear a man's voice on the radio at 11:47 and then have him gone by morning without it sitting in you somewhere. But I did not begin actively pulling on threads for several months. What pulled me back was not grief or guilt or suspicion. It was a specific thing that happened during an unrelated inspection that I could not square with anything in my training or experience, and that, when I tried to document it, produced a response from the district that I am still not able to fully explain. In January, about 3 months after Marcus disappeared, I was assigned to perform an in-depth inspection on Structure 12-04, a vertical lift bridge over Bayou Blue, a smaller structure in the western part of the corridor. It was a 2-day job. I had a field technician with me named Corey Tran, who had been with the district about 2 years and was working toward his Level 1 certification. The inspection was straightforward through most of day 1. We documented the deck condition, the truss geometry, the counterweight suspension system, the tower ladder access points. Standard inventory. Day 2 was scheduled for the mechanical room and the drive systems. The bridge had been opened for marine traffic at approximately 2:15 a.m. the previous night, according to the operator log. A single opening, duration 11 minutes, for a tug pushing a loaded work barge southbound. This was documented in the waterway operator shift report, which I had requested as part of my pre-inspection record pull. When Corey and I arrived at the bridge at 7:30 a.m. on day 2, the mechanical room door was unlocked. This was not in itself unusual. The overnight operator sometimes left it open for maintenance access. But the mechanical room showed something that was unusual. The drive system, the electric motor assembly that raises and lowers the lift span, had heat signatures on both motor housings that were inconsistent with a single 11-minute operational cycle at 2:15 a.m. I am not an electrical engineer, but I have documented enough drive system thermal patterns to recognize what sustained operation looks like versus what a single short cycle looks like. The housings were warm in the way they get after repeated use. I noted this in my field record and mentioned it to the operator when he came on shift at 8. He confirmed the single 2:15 a.m. opening and said he had not cycled the drive for any other purpose. He seemed unbothered by my question, answered it directly, and I had no reason to disbelieve him. But the thermal signature was there. I documented it. I photographed both motor housings with my thermal imaging camera, which logged the images with timestamps. I noted the ambient temperature, the time of documentation, the operator's stated operational history. I wrote it up as an anomalous finding requiring follow-up, recommended a review of the drive system's automated event log, which records every motor activation with timestamp and duration, and submitted the field report to the district. The district's response came back in about 10 days. It acknowledged the thermal anomaly, noted that the drive system's automated event log showed no activations beyond the confirmed 2:15 a.m. cycle, and attributed the temperature discrepancy to ambient heat retention in the mechanical room combined with possible sensor drift in my imaging equipment. The recommendation for further review was closed without action. I asked the district whether anyone had checked the waterway operator's VHF log for marine traffic beyond the documented tug. The response was that the Coast Guard's Sector New Orleans maintains the definitive marine traffic record for the waterway and that any discrepancy in the bridge log versus the marine traffic record would require a formal data request through the Coast Guard liaison officer. I submitted that request. It took 6 weeks. When the response came back, it showed no marine traffic on Bayou Blue between the 2:15 a.m. opening and 6 a.m. Southwest. The drive system had been used. Not for documented traffic. Not for any traffic. I want to be precise about what I mean when I say I began to notice a pattern, because the word pattern implies something clean and legible, and what I was actually dealing with was the opposite. A collection of things that individually had explanations and collectively refused to resolve into anything I could name. After the Bayou Blue finding, I began going back through my inspection records and the records of other inspectors on the corridor, not systematically at first, but the way you pick at something that bothers you without meaning to. I was looking for other thermal anomalies on drive systems. I found 2, one on a swing bridge near Raceland documented by a technician named Priolo about 18 months prior, one on a bascule bridge near Cutoff documented in my own records from a year before that. Both had been attributed to equipment issues or ambient conditions and closed. I pulled the marine traffic records for both. Both had the same pattern. Confirmed operational windows in the bridge operator logs. Drive system evidence of use beyond those windows. No corresponding marine traffic in the Coast Guard records. 3 bridges. 3 instances of mechanical systems showing evidence of operation during hours when no traffic was recorded, no opening was documented, and no authorization existed. I want to be careful here. I am not saying the bridges were being operated in secret. I am saying the systems showed evidence of use that did not correspond to any operational record I could find, and that the records themselves were complete and consistent in their denial of that use. That is a different thing. It is, in fact, a more disturbing thing. I did not contact Marcus's family. I want to be clear about that. I am telling this account because I believe it needs to exist in some form outside of the documents that are currently filed in the district office, but I am not doing it for them, and I would not want them to think I am. What I did instead was go back to the district office's archived records, the physical archive, which lives in a storage room behind the materials testing lab and which contains inspection files, operational logs, and maintenance records going back to the 1970s. Most of this material has not been digitized. It is paper, stored in bankers' boxes organized by structure number and year, and accessing it requires signing a log sheet at the front desk, which I did under the pretense of pulling historical bearing data for an upcoming inspection on an older swing bridge. I spent 4 evenings in that archive over the course of about 3 weeks. What I was looking for, specifically, was any documentation of anomalous drive system behavior on corridor movable bridges during nighttime hours. I did not find that, exactly. What I found instead was a folder, misfiled in the box for Structure 11-01, the Thibodeau Crossing, Marcus's Bridge, that contained a document unlike anything I had encountered in 11 years of DOTD paperwork. It was a supplemental operational directive. 14 pages, photocopied on what appeared to be original letterhead from the Louisiana Department of Highways, the predecessor agency to DOTD that was reorganized in 1974. The document was undated. The header read, Supplemental Guidance, Movable Bridge Operations, Lafourche Parish Corridor, for district use only. I am going to describe what it contained carefully, because I have thought about how to do this for a long time, and I want to be accurate rather than dramatic. The document opened with 2 paragraphs of what appeared to be standard administrative language about the coordination of movable bridge operations with waterway traffic management. It was dry, technical, and unremarkable. Beginning on page 3, it changed. The 3rd page opened with a section header that read, Night Operations, Corridor-Wide Considerations after 0000 hours. What followed was a set of operational guidance points, not rules in the numbered sense, but procedural recommendations written in the careful, passive voice of institutional documentation. I am going to describe them rather than quote them directly, because I did not photograph the document on my first encounter with it, a decision I have since reconsidered many times. The first guidance point stated that bridge operators and inspection personnel assigned to corridor structures during the hours between midnight and approximately 4:30 a.m. should be aware that the operational behavior of movable bridge mechanical systems during those hours may not fully correspond to documented traffic events, and that this non-correspondence should be noted in personal field records but should not be entered into official system logs unless accompanied by a confirmed safety implication. Read that again. Non-correspondence between what the mechanical systems do and what the traffic records show was not only known, it was anticipated. It had been anticipated, apparently, since at least the period when this document was produced, which given the letterhead was sometime before 1974. The second guidance point stated that personnel who observe a movable bridge in an intermediate position, partially opened, during midnight to dawn hours without corresponding marine traffic in the waterway below should not attempt to intervene with or manually override the bridge's mechanical systems. The language was specific, do not attempt to interrupt or terminate an ongoing operational cycle, regardless of the absence of observable traffic. The third guidance point addressed radio contact. It stated that during the relevant overnight hours, personnel may observe radio channel activity, specifically carrier signal keying without voice, on assigned district frequencies. It stated that this activity should not be responded to and should not be logged in official radio records, though it acknowledged that automated logging systems may capture the events and noted that this was acceptable as long as no responsive action was taken. Carrier signal keying without voice. 12:09 a.m. 12:34 a.m. 12:58 a.m. Marcus's radio. The transmissions that appeared in the district log and not in the unit log. The ones the investigation report had attributed to a calibration issue. The fourth guidance point was the one that has stayed with me in the way that I suspect it will not leave. It stated that in the event a bridge operator or inspection personnel member becomes separated from a structure during the overnight operational window, and the language used was exactly that, becomes separated, the correct protocol was to secure the perimeter, confirm the bridge's mechanical status remotely if possible, and contact the district duty officer. It stated that a separated personnel member should not be searched for within the structure's immediate operational envelope until after 4:30 a.m. It gave no reason. It did not explain what the structure's immediate operational envelope meant. It did not explain what happened to people who were searched for before 4:30 a.m., or what had made it necessary to write that instruction in the first place. I sat with that document for a long time. I was in the archive room, under a single fluorescent tube, at a folding table surrounded by 40 years of deteriorating paperwork, and I sat there and read those 14 pages 3 times. The remaining 10 pages were a return to bureaucratic normalcy, maintenance scheduling language, procurement references, coordination protocols with the Coast Guard that were clearly outdated given agency restructuring. Whatever the document was, whoever had written it, The heart of it was in those 4 guidance points on pages 3 through 6. I did not remove the document. I left it in the folder. I signed out of the archive. I drove home. I did not sleep well. The next morning I went back to sign in and retrieve the document properly, with my phone to photograph it. The folder was not in the box. I pulled the entire box. I checked the boxes on either side. I checked the floor. I asked the administrative assistant at the front desk whether anyone else had accessed the archive the previous evening. She checked the sign-in log. Nobody had signed in after me. I am a methodical person. This is not a virtue I am claiming, it is a professional requirement that has become a habit of mind. When I encounter a discrepancy I cannot immediately explain, my first response is not alarm but procedure: document what you have, verify what you can independently verify, and do not draw conclusions that outrun your evidence. So I documented what I had. I wrote out the content of the document from memory, as precisely as I could, in a personal notebook I keep separate from my official field records. I noted the physical characteristics of the document, the letterhead, the paper weight, the photocopied quality of the text, the absence of a date or individual signatory. I noted where I had found it and when. I noted that it was absent when I returned. Then I began trying to verify elements of it independently. The first thing I tried to verify was the historical basis. The document had been produced on Department of Highways letterhead, which meant it predated the 1974 agency reorganization. I submitted a public records request to the Louisiana Secretary of State's office, which maintains historical state agency documents, requesting any operational directives issued by the Department of Highways related to movable bridge operations in Lafourche Parish. The response, which came back after about 3 weeks, stated that no responsive documents had been located. I submitted a follow-up request, narrowing the parameters. Same response. I contacted the LSU Louisiana Collection, the State Historical Archive at the university, which holds a substantial collection of Louisiana Highway Department records. A librarian there spent about a week with my request and came back with nothing that matched. The document, as far as any external record was concerned, did not exist. This is not the same as saying it never existed. Institutional archives are incomplete. Paper gets lost, misfiled, thrown away. The absence of a record of a document is not evidence that the document was fabricated. But I had also been a state employee for 11 years, and I understood how state agency records worked well enough to know that an operational directive of that type, a formal supplemental guidance document issued on agency letterhead, would have had a distribution record, an issuance date, an authoring office. Even if the original copies were long gone, there should have been some trace of its administrative existence. There was nothing. I want to describe what it is like to perform a night inspection on a movable bridge, because I don't think most people have any mental image of it, and it matters for what I am going to tell you next. A major bridge inspection requires assessment of components that are only safely accessible when the bridge is out of service, which for a movable bridge means the span is in its closed position, traffic is either stopped or rerouted, and the mechanical systems are powered down or in a locked-out state. Night inspections are sometimes scheduled for low traffic hours to minimize disruption. They are uncommon but not rare. When you are on a movable bridge at 2 in the morning, the experience is specific. The structure is lit by your own equipment, headlamps, work lights on stands, the orange cone perimeter of safety barriers on the deck above you. The surrounding waterway is dark. You can hear it. In the bayou country, at night, the water is not quiet, there is ambient biological noise, insects and frogs and the distant sound of something moving in the reeds, and underneath all of it the particular sound of slow, dark water moving against concrete and steel. The bridge itself makes noise. Thermal cycling, the expansion and contraction of metal as temperature changes through the night, produces sounds that an experienced inspector recognizes and does not mistake for anything else. Ticking. Low groaning. Occasional sharp reports from a truss member adjusting. These are normal. Expected. What is not normal, what I have never heard on any bridge in any condition before the events I am describing, is the sound of mechanical systems activating when they should be locked out. I was on structure 09-17, the swing bridge where I had been the night Marcus disappeared. This was about 5 months after his disappearance, in March. I was there for an unscheduled follow-up on a crack I had documented in a gusset plate during my previous inspection, a fracture-critical finding that required expedited documentation before a repair authorization could be issued. I was alone. Corey Tran had a family obligation and I had not assigned anyone else because it was a 2-hour job, a documentation task rather than a full inspection, and I did not see the need. It was approximately 1:15 a.m. I was on the lower chord of the swing span, about 12 feet above the water, photographing the gusset plate from 2 angles. The bridge was in locked position. The mechanical room was sealed and the drive system was in its lockout-tagout state. I had confirmed this personally before descending from the deck. At approximately 1:22 a.m., the pivot pier machinery began to run. Not a full activation. Not the full drive cycle that produces a bridge opening. Something preliminary, the hydraulic pressure building in the lock bar system, which is the sequence that precedes the mechanical locks releasing. It is a sound you learn early in this work and do not forget. A deep, rhythmic pressurization. It lasts about 40 seconds before the locks release. I knew the drive was locked out. I had put the lock on myself. I stayed where I was. I do not know exactly why I didn't move immediately. Partly the position I was in, moving quickly from a lower chord access point in the dark is not safe. Partly something else that I am not going to try to characterize because I don't have a professional vocabulary for it. The pressurization sound ran for about 30 seconds and then stopped. The locks did not release. The bridge did not move. I finished documenting the gusset plate. I climbed back to the deck. I went to the mechanical room. The lock was in place. Undisturbed. The tagout card was exactly as I had left it. I sat in my truck for about 10 minutes. Then I drove to a gas station, bought a cup of bad coffee, and sat in the parking lot thinking about what I had heard, and about the supplemental directive, and about do not attempt to interrupt or terminate an ongoing operational cycle. I had not interrupted anything. The cycle, whatever it was, had stopped on its own. I did not know whether that was relevant. I went back to the district archive 3 more times over the following 2 months. I was no longer pretending to have other reasons for being there. I told the front desk I was pulling historical records for a structural assessment and she waved me through without looking up. The document was never there. I went through every box in the archive that could plausibly contain a misfiled operational directive. I read hundreds of pages of maintenance records, inspection files, operational logs dating back to the late 1960s. I found 2 things worth noting. The first was a maintenance log from Structure 11-01, the Thibodeau Crossing, dated November 1971. It was a routine monthly maintenance record, the kind that lists lubrication tasks and minor repairs. At the bottom of the log, in handwriting different from the main body of the document, someone had written, "Night behavior confirmed again. Advised crew per standing guidance. No disruption. Night behavior." No further elaboration. Nothing else in the file addressed it. The maintenance logs for the months before and after contained no similar notation. The second thing was less definitive but has continued to bother me. In a box of personnel records from the mid-1980s, which should not have been in the structural archive at all, I found a single sheet of paper that appeared to be a routing slip for an interdepartmental memo. The memo itself was not attached. The routing slip showed it had been sent from the district maintenance supervisor to the district bridge program manager, and the subject line read, Re, Fontenot Inquiry, Overnight Operational Protocols. Fontenot. I stared at that for a long time. Marcus Fontenot had disappeared in October of the previous year. This routing slip was from 1986. Marcus was not yet born in 1986. But Fontenot is not an uncommon name in Lafourche Parish. The routing slip did not necessarily have anything to do with Marcus. It could have been any number of Fontenots in the district's operational history. It could have been a maintenance worker, an operator, an inspector. It could have been someone who had also been separated from a structure during the overnight operational window. And the question that followed from that, which I have not been able to set down since I first thought it, was whether someone in this district, in 1986, had tried to search within the structure's immediate operational envelope before 4:30 a.m. In May, 7 months after Marcus's disappearance, I was assigned to perform an in-depth inspection on Structure 11-01. The Thibodeau Crossing itself. I did not request the assignment. It came through the normal rotation. My supervisor, a civil engineer named Beatrice Aulet who runs the corridor program from the Baton Rouge office, sent it through the standard tasking system with a 2-week lead time. I confirmed it. I did not mention to her anything I had been looking into, because I did not have anything I could present in a form that would survive a professional conversation. I arrived at the bridge at 7 a.m. on a Monday, with Corey Tran and a structural technician from the district office named Watts. It was a 3-day inspection. The first 2 days were routine: deck condition, approach slabs, railing systems, the bascule leaf geometry, the trunnion bearings, the counterweight assembly. I worked carefully and I documented everything. I was not looking for anything beyond the legitimate inspection scope. On the 3rd day, I went into the control house. The current operator, a man named Turode who had been on the bridge since Marcus's disappearance, was present. He was cooperative and professional. He let me document the console, the indicator systems, the radio equipment. The control house was clean and orderly. I told Turode I needed to pull the bridge's mechanical event log for the past 12 months as part of the inspection record. This is standard. The event log records every operational activation, every opening, every lock cycle, every motor start, with timestamps. It is downloaded from the control system's data module onto a USB drive and provided to the inspector for inclusion in the inspection file. Turode pulled the log without hesitation. I reviewed it that evening in my hotel room. There were 214 documented bridge openings in the 12-month record. That is roughly consistent with expected marine traffic on Bayou Lafourche through Thibodeau. There were also 31 mechanical events logged between midnight and 4:30 a.m. that were not bridge openings. Not partial cycles. Not maintenance activations. Not test cycles, which carry a specific identifying code in the log. They were logged as system activations, undefined event class. The log system's event codes are finite and defined in the system documentation, which I have. The undefined event class code exists in the documentation. It is described as a catch-all for activations that do not correspond to any recognized operational command input, activations that the control system cannot attribute to an operator action, a maintenance command, or an automated schedule. 31 activations in 12 months. Roughly 2 to 3 per month. All between midnight and 4:30 a.m. I pulled the marine traffic records for the same period from the Coast Guard portal, which takes about 15 minutes with a credentials login. None of the 31 activations corresponded to documented waterway traffic. I stayed on site an extra day. I told Beatrice I needed additional time on the counterweight documentation, which was true. There was a bearing wear pattern I wanted to photograph in better light. She approved without question. What I was actually doing, for part of that extra day, was sitting in my truck on the East Bank approach watching the bridge. I am not entirely sure what I expected to learn from that. It was daylight. Nothing unusual happened. The bridge opened once at 10:15 a.m. for a tug, clean and normal, the leaves rising smoothly and locking in the vertical position while the tug passed below and then descending and locking closed again in the 4-minute cycle that I have watched dozens of times. But I was there, and I was watching, and I was thinking about the 1971 maintenance log, night behavior confirmed again, and about the routing slip with Fontenot's name on it, and about Marcus's 3 carrier signal transmissions, and about the thermal signatures on drive systems at 3 different bridges, and I was trying to understand what a pattern like this meant. I did not find an explanation that day. I drove back to Thibodeau, finished my paperwork, and filed the inspection report. The report documented the 31 undefined event class activations and recommended that DOTD request a formal technical review of the control system software from the manufacturer, on the basis that an undefined event class occurring with this frequency likely indicated a logging software fault. This was not what I actually thought was happening. It was the most defensible finding I could produce within the professional standards I am required to meet, and I want to be honest about that. I wrote a finding I could support with documentation and which pointed toward a resolution I did not believe was the real one, because the real one was not something I could put in an official inspection report. The manufacturer's technical review was completed about 6 weeks later. The finding was that the control system software was functioning within normal parameters and that the undefined event class activations were likely the result of electromagnetic interference with the sensor array, possibly from marine traffic radar on passing vessels. I received a copy of that finding through the standard distribution. I read it. I thought about the supplemental directive. About the instruction not to log these events in official system records unless accompanied by a confirmed safety implication. Somebody, at some point in the operational history of this corridor, had looked at whatever this is and had made a decision. The decision was not to investigate it. The decision was to observe it, to document it in personal records only, to stay out of its way, and to make sure that anyone working on these bridges at night understood that its operational cycles were not to be interrupted. That decision had been made so long ago that the document encoding it had passed out of any retrievable institutional memory. What remained were traces, a notation in a maintenance log, a routing slip, the thermal signatures, the event codes, and the phenomenon itself, still running its unrecorded cycles in the hours before dawn, on bridges up and down the corridor. And Marcus. I keep coming back to Marcus. The directive said that a separated personnel member should not be searched for within the structure's immediate operational envelope until after 4:30 a.m. It did not say what happened after 4:30 a.m. It did not say what the outcome was for someone who was in that envelope when a cycle ran. The maintenance crew had reached the bridge at 2 a.m. inside the operational window. I do not know whether they tried to access the structure immediately or waited outside. The internal review report did not address the timeline of their arrival and entry in sufficient detail to answer that question. I thought about requesting the raw maintenance log from that night, the work crew's own records, but I was not sure what I would do with the answer. I still do not know what I would do with it. There is a thing that happens to you after you have been carrying something like this for a while, alone, inside a professional framework that has no mechanism to hold it. It is not exactly paranoia. It is more like a recalibration of your baseline. You begin reading the environment differently, not with fear, but with the particular attention that you learn when you know that discrepancy exists and that it may not announce itself. I notice things now that I registered but did not retain before. The way a control house operator answers questions about overnight shifts. Whether a maintenance log has any of the small personal notations, the extra comments that people write in margins when something has caught their attention, that experienced operators sometimes add. The way the district radio system responds during late-night coverage checks, whether there are keying events without voice traffic on the archived log. There usually are. Not every night. Not on every structure. But with a frequency that is, now that I am looking for it, not consistent with equipment calibration issues. In September, I was assigned to a night inspection on a vertical lift bridge in the eastern part of the corridor, structure 14-02, a bridge I had not worked on since my first year with the district. I was with Corey Tran and a new technician I will call D, who had been with us about 4 months and was still in the early stage of learning what this work actually involves. We arrived at 10 p.m. and worked through most of the night without incident. At approximately 2:40 a.m., I was on the upper deck near the tower access when I heard the drive motor in the north tower start. I knew it immediately. I have learned, over the past year, to identify drive system sounds with a precision I did not previously have. I was not alarmed, I was alert. There is a difference. I did not go to the tower. I moved to a position where I could observe the lift span directly, which did not put me in or under the operational envelope of the span itself. I signaled Corey with my headlamp, 2 short flashes, our established signal for stop and hold position, and I watched. The drive ran for approximately 90 seconds. The span did not move. The locks did not release. The drive stopped. From the waterway below, in the dark, there was a single sound that I am going to describe as accurately as I can, though I am aware that my description will not be satisfying. It was the sound of water displacement consistent with something moving through the waterway under the bridge. Not a large vessel. Not a small vessel, either. Something that displaced water and generated a small wake against the concrete fender system, which I could hear clearly from where I stood. There were no navigation lights. There was no engine sound. The water settled. I waited 5 minutes. Then I signaled Corey to resume and we finished the inspection. D asked me in the morning what the drive activation had been. I told him it was thermal expansion causing a false activation in the motor's thermostat relay, and that he would see it occasionally on older lift bridges at night. I told him it was nothing to be concerned about. He wrote it in his personal notes. I watched him do it. I thought about that routing slip from 1986. I thought about the supplemental directive and how it had found its way into that archive box and how long it had been there before I found it and how long after I found it before it was gone. I thought about what it meant that someone had written the thing down at all. Whoever wrote it had understood that the people working on these bridges at night needed guidance. Not an explanation, there was no explanation in those 14 pages. Just guidance. Stay out of the way. Don't log it officially. Don't search before 4:30. Here is what you will see. Here is what you should do when you see it. The writer had not tried to stop it. Had not escalated it above the district level, as far as any record shows. Had not, apparently, believed it was something that could be stopped or should be. Had instead built a quiet procedural framework around it and passed that framework forward, through whatever chain of persons and documents, until the chain reached a point where the document itself was no longer necessary because the knowledge had simply stopped being passed. And then Marcus happened. I have spent a significant amount of time trying to determine whether Marcus's disappearance is connected to the night behavior or whether it is a separate tragedy that I have been overlaying with significance because they share a geography and a timeline. This is not a rhetorical question I am using to create a particular effect. It is the question I actually sit with. The honest answer is that I cannot determine it. The evidence is not sufficient to establish connection, and it is not sufficient to rule it out. What I can say is this: Marcus was on that bridge during the overnight operational window. The bridge showed no anomaly in its official systems. He was not found. The directive says don't search before 4:30. The crew arrived at 2 a.m. I have also looked, carefully, at what I could find about other operators who had worked long-term on corridor structures and who had left those positions without clear documentation of why. Not disappeared, I am not claiming a pattern of disappearances. But lateral transfers, early retirements, medical separations, positions left without a clean reason in the personnel record. I found 4 instances over 30 years. Maybe 2 of them have explanations I didn't dig far enough to find. Maybe all 4 do. I do not know. What I know is that the bridges on this corridor have been doing something at night for at least 50 years, that at some point someone with authority in this district understood that and chose containment over disclosure, and that the containment protocol has degraded to the point where the people currently working these structures at night have no access to it. Including the operators. Including people like Marcus, who sat in a control house on Bayou Lafourche for 6 years and was never told what the 1971 maintenance log meant by night behavior or why there was a guidance document that said to stay out of the way. I do not know whether knowing would have changed anything. I do not know what it would have been possible to do differently on the night of October 14th given what we understand and don't understand about what happens on these bridges. The directive's instruction about not searching before 4:30 implies, but does not state, that waiting produces a different outcome. Whether that means the person reappears, or can be found, or whether it means something else entirely, I have no way to know. The crew arrived at 2 a.m. They did not find him. It was 2 a.m. I have drafted a formal report 4 times. The first 3 drafts I deleted. Not because I was afraid of professional consequences, though those are real and I am not pretending otherwise. Because I could not find a way to write it that did not depend on evidence that would not survive a professional review. The 31 undefined event class activations are in the inspection file and are attributed to electromagnetic interference. The thermal anomalies are in my field records and are attributed to sensor drift. The maintenance log notation and the routing slip exist in a physical archive that I cannot prove anyone else has seen and that contains no further context. The supplemental directive exists in my personal notebook, transcribed from memory, with no original document to support it. I have procedurally documented everything I can support. What I cannot do, within the framework of the professional standards I operate under, is state what I actually believe is happening, because the gap between the evidence I can produce and the conclusion I have reached is not one that a formal report can bridge. The 4th draft is different. The 4th draft is what you are reading now. It is not a formal report. It is a record of what I found, what I heard, what I observed, what I reasoned, written in the plainest language I can manage, by someone who has spent 11 years learning to describe the difference between how a structure presents and what it actually is. I am still working the corridor. I completed an inspection on structure 09-17 last month, the swing bridge, the one where I heard the pressurization sequence in March. I was on the lower court again, in roughly the same position, at roughly the same time of night. It was January now, colder, the water below dark and still. At 1:18 a.m., the pressurization sequence began. I stayed where I was. I kept my headlamp on the gusset plate I was documenting. I held the camera steady. At 1:47 a.m., the pressurization stopped. The locks did not release. From somewhere below me, from the water, there was the displacement sound. The same displacement sound I had heard at structure 14-02 in September. No lights. No engine. I finished my documentation. I climbed back to the deck. I checked the lockout tagout on the mechanical room. Undisturbed. I sat in my truck. I thought about D, the new technician, writing thermal expansion, false activation, thermostat relay in his personal notes. I thought about what it means to hand someone a false explanation that keeps them calm and functional, and what it means to hand someone the real situation when the real situation has no actionable resolution. I thought about whoever wrote those 14 pages. I thought about the fact that they had written them at all, that someone had decided the people on these bridges at night deserved, at minimum, the knowledge that this was real and that there was a way to be in the presence of it without being taken by it. Whether Marcus was taken by it, I do not know. Whether the crew's early arrival was what cost him, I do not know. Whether there is a version of that night in which he comes back at 4:30 a.m. and the control house door is unlocked from the inside and he is standing there with his coffee and his jacket and no explanation for the gap, I do not know. I do not know. What I know is that there is something in the waterway of this corridor that has operational cycles. That it has used these bridges, has run their mechanical systems, has used their radio frequencies, has moved beneath them in the dark without lights or engine noise, for at least 50 years. That someone understood this well enough to write a procedural framework around it. That the framework has been lost. And that the people who are most at risk are the ones sitting alone in control houses between midnight and 4:30 a.m., with no knowledge of what the district once knew and apparently decided not to keep teaching. I have 2 more inspections on the corridor this quarter. Structure 11-01 is not scheduled, but structures 12-04 and 16-09 are. I will do them at night because that is when the access windows are available. I have written this account and I am going to leave a copy in the district archive, refiled in the box where I found the original directive, because I do not have a better option. It will not survive long. It did not survive the first time. But I am going to put it there because the alternative is to let the framework continue its degradation, and I am unwilling to do that, and because whatever else is true about what moves through the waters of this corridor before dawn, the bridges themselves are real, and the people on them at night are real, and they deserve to know what the district once understood and lost the habit of saying. The fluorescent in Bay 4 of the district office is still flickering. 3 short. 1 long. The work order has not been filed. I have stopped expecting it to be.